Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for having us. We're very excited to share with you a new design platform for our practice around adaptive reuse, and a little bit more detail case study around a current project we have that Kathleen's been leading. So just to introduce ourselves, I'm Reade Dixon. I'm the director at Fraser and Partners. We've got the fabulously talented Kathleen Bainbridge, who's an associate and project leader for this platform for us. We've had the pleasure of building probably about a bit over $5 billion worth of work predominantly in Melbourne. We've got about $6 billion in design at the moment, but we are seeing a significant shift in the way that our clients and the built environment are approaching value in development. Comes from, I suppose adaptive reuse obviously has a sustainability or environmental leadership position, which is widely known, but sequester carbon, it's the ability to recycle buildings and materials. But moreover, we're seeing now it becoming having some financial benefits or becoming financially attractive through a real shift in the approach to property development. So we're very lucky in Australia. We come from a resource-rich nation. We have a long history of demolishing buildings, going to greenfield sites, rebuilding buildings. It's a pretty inefficient way and a little bit of an unsophisticated way to approach property development as compared with the rest of the world, which due to their limitations on resources and really on land availability, have a more progressive approach to adaptive reuse. Probably in the last 3 years, though, particularly here in Australia, we've seen huge increases in construction costs. We're just hearing about some of the challenges around that, and land availability becoming more and more difficult, particularly around the lack of infrastructure development. And so this platform for us, we see really becoming a sort of primary project opportunity for a collection of building typologies. Particularly for the project case study today, we're going to talk about office. The guiding markets around that in the market at the moment is that since COVID, there's been a real shift away from B-grade, C-grade office buildings. We've seen a complete value proposition change in the way that, or the expectations people have in the built environment they occupy. Real struggle in some businesses getting people back to the office that prefer to work in their house where they can open the doors and go out in the backyard and have their dog around and have a sort of built environment that suits their personal values and their interests. And moreover, the last 5 years has really changed the corporate and commercial shift in their value proposition around ESG. So now environmental leadership, social responsibility, and a sort of advocacy for those qualities being evident in the built environment has really changed people's expectation on use of built environment. And so we've seen, particularly in 3 years, there's a huge shift. So 2020, the B-grade and C-grade office vacancy in Melbourne was at about 7%. It's dropped completely to 20% already, only in 3 years. The A-grade office vacancy rate has declined a little bit, and that's mostly due to an increased number of new office projects. But what it's really describing is a real flight to A-grade office buildings. I suppose the question for us is what's driving that change? So for us, the millennial workforce, which is soon to become the majority workforce in Australia, who have a value proposition that's focused around sustainability, authenticity in the workplace, and a well-being of environment that isn't directly available in some of those older buildings. And more importantly, something that we're interested in talking to our private development clients who have sort of 25-year vision for the projects, is that by 2035, 80% of decision makers will be millennials. So we're soon to see a huge shift in corporate positioning in projects, people's business values and their approach to their business priorities is going to become more closely aligned to the ESG values that we see available in projects like adaptive reuse. So for us, we had a bit of a shift in our practice around what the design qualities are that represent that. Everything now has a climate positive approach. We're doing fully electric buildings, no fossil fuels, powered through renewables on site and a green energy partnership. The visibility and tactility of authenticity through the projects. We're in a world we're surrounded by fake environments, led by sort of online campaigns and everybody's social platforms. There's a real search for authenticity in everything in our life, and we're seeing that become the sort of predominant predominant architectural expression of the new generation of buildings, and real opportunities to see the projects in a deeper connection to context. I don't know if there's many architects here, but all we do is talk about context, 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 and that context seemed to be, the development profile that came out of Melbourne in the 1920s. But as a city here in Naarm, we've got a much deeper connection to place than that. We're really enjoying embedding those projects in a deeper understanding of place through pre-settlement conditions, both culturally and more directly expressed through landscape and public art. And a proactive approach to wellness. Ludogenesis is the term that we use, which is a Jewish doctor who talks about wellness being a proactive solution rather than a reactive solution of wellness, and how we get those environments supporting the lifestyle that we all want in the built environment. And lastly, the sort of engagement of social and cultural offers within the buildings. How do we add them into these adaptive reuse buildings which didn't really anticipate a sort of open, permeable, more functioning building when they were designed 50 or 60 years ago. So just quickly how this project came about to us. Kathleen's going to talk in a little bit more detail about the project. We had a client come to us who we've completed a collection of projects for, came to us with this project opportunity. We currently have quite a large C-grade office building on site. We looked at, well, to build a new building, the sort of construction budget would be about, let's round it out to $100 million. That gives us a site value of $20 million in the way that the metrics get measured for the project. But what we soon understood is that even a low-performing C-grade or B-grade office building, or it can be a residential or commercial residential use, actually has a much larger value than just an infill land opportunity. And so when we were trying to apply effectively demolishing a $60 million building and adding a brand new build of $100 million, we ended up in effectively a sort of territory around the project that moved the feasibility way past where the project would be viable. And actually the sweet spot for us was to come back to a position where we retain the existing building, retain the $60 million value that was in the building, and reduce the extent of work from $100 million to $60 million through adaptive reuse, and basically had a completely different project than the brief was to us, which was a sort of demolished project and spend $100 on a new build. It was to retain the value in the existing building, which works better for our client, and reduce the amount of capital expenditure on the adaptive reuse platform. Why we're seeing that become a bit of a common trend at the moment, just how we position that in the sort of understanding of where Melbourne sits, is that there is a life cycle period happening like 10 years before and probably for the next 10 years that places the post-war boom in Melbourne. Those life cycle buildings are becoming anywhere between sort of 60, 70 to 100 years old now. And so they're at complete life cycle end for lifts, mechanical, facades, which have been so highly developed around environmental requirements for buildings. But the structure holds great integrity. It's built in a time which is around stability, not efficiency. So there's large embedded value within the structures of the building, and we see that life cycle continuing. But how do we reset the life cycle requirements for the inbuilt building services to meet a new electrical and communications platform, new lifting sequence, a higher position for the building envelope for fresh air and thermal comfort. But the benefits of that are that we retain the structure. And at the moment, for us, at least for our projects, the largest cost for any project is construction, and KB will touch on it a little bit shortly, but importantly, time. The biggest financial cost to a project is time, and the biggest time saving is in retaining the basement, the building core, and the building superstructure. So I think that the piece that really interests us at the moment is that, like all of you guys, we find it really challenging talking to our clients in a merit-based approach to environmental leadership in the projects. But what we found refreshing in the last 3 months doing a couple of these projects is that the economic viability or feasibility of the projects is now very closely tied to an adaptive reuse platform. The values of buildings have gone up, the value of construction has gone up, and the value of land holdings has increased year on year for the last 40 years. So we think there's great opportunity in retaining buildings and giving us what we want in a ability to sequester carbon, hold onto the structure, and provide some environmental leadership with the project. Gives us an authentic expression for the building. But importantly, we think we've got a case study here that provides the metrics that allow us to talk directly to the decision makers around that, which is the private development community. I might hand over to Kathleen, who's going to talk specifically around our case study at 60 Albert.
Yeah, so the last two speakers did ask for a case study, and we're here to deliver. What we're here to talk about is 60 Albert Road. So 60 Albert Road was built in around 1971 in a previously, previously quite low-rise residential part of South Melbourne. And it is a great example of a modernist building. It is big, it is bold, it is rectangular, and has very little care for how the environment impacts it or how it impacts the environment. And you can see that over the years, other developments have come along, and it's really become the poor cousin of the street. And I don't think it would surprise any of you to learn that the vacancy rates for this building are sitting around 50%. So we know that people don't want to be in it. And really, we can see that ingrained in the architecture is the ethos of the 1970s. It is very car-centric. We have car parking under the building. We have a multi-storey car park at the back. Then the car parking wraps around the top. It pushes all of the public interface to about 30 square metres on the street, raised up to have no connection. And then the office plates are dark with very poor light access, absolutely no natural ventilation, and just copy-paste all the way up the building. So if we're going to talk about adaptive reuse, it's important to be really clear that we're not talking about a bit of a facelift, we're not talking about a bit of a refurb, we're talking about injecting the principles that contemporary Australians, us millennials, mainly millennials, hate to put us in a little box there, but all the things that we want in our buildings now and going forward into the future. So we have a project that's actually going to last a lot better than the current building. So those things, as Reade touched on, it's about a project that is going to promote our wellness, it's going to make us better to be in there. It's something that is more considerate to its environmental impact and is particularly biophilic in its designs. Yes, planting, but also our connection to raw natural materials that sit in a cyclical system. So the first big move that we need to make for this project is to completely demolish the multi-storey car park at the back. And in its place, we've erected this pavilion tower, which leans on the existing, for the structural engineers in the room, leans on the existing structure of the building to hold it up, but it's totally free of cause. So it's effectively a 100% efficient addition to the existing building. This comes with a very purposeful decision to reduce the car parking by 68%. That reduction, paired with bike parking, e-scooters, electric vehicles, and an extensive end of trip, pushes all of the transportation elements down underground. So where previously we had a 30 square metre public interface, now we have an extensive connection that goes from the street to the cafe, to the work club, up to the canopy garden, and opens that entire space out. We obviously are going from a gas building to 100% electric building. The positive result of that, in addition to the obvious, is that some of that gas infrastructure space can then be reallocated, because we do have a fixed amount of space we're talking about, can be reallocated to be water detention and recycling systems. So we can have a completely closed loop water recycling system, which is pretty essential considering we've got over 15,000 square metres of landscaping across the project. If I take a step back, and I think we all like alliteration, so our version for adaptive reuse is retain, recycle, and reinvest. So first of all, what can we retain? As Reade touched on, not everything in the current building has value for this project. The facade is tight, it's not performing well. What we can hold value with is the structure. So by retaining over 85% of the existing structure, we can hold 6,400 tonnes of carbon in the building. So that's obviously not just avoiding it going to landfill, it's actually holding the building, and then we don't have to reproduce it to recreate as another structure. Step 2 is recycling. Now, I'm not going to talk about closed loop systems because I think that there are people in the room who are going to be much better informed, but in a commercial architectural context, dealing with novated contracts, the most important aspect of having successful recycling systems is relationships. For us, that's having great relationships with our suppliers and having really great relationships with our builders, who in turn have their own relationships with suppliers, so that we can retain as much in these projects as possible. We know that aluminium can be recycled easily, we know the facades can, we know the carpet tiles can, we know the ceiling tiles can, but time after time, we see that things like carpet tiles and ceiling tiles going directly to landfill instead of going through the proper process. So by developing the relationships, having that conversation early, and including the builder in the conversation, we're much more likely to have a successful result. And then, of course, we reinvest in the project. So in order to reinvest successfully, what we want to do is we want to convert an existing C-grade office building with a 3-star energy rating and get it up to an A-grade 5-star energy rating for the project. So it's a lot about infrastructure investment. We have over 800 square metres of PV panels across the multiple rooftops in the building. We wrap the existing building and the new pavilion tower in a high-performance facade. And then we've parametrically modelled our shading system so that we can mitigate solar heat gain and sun glare to reduce, again, our load on the building's energy requirements to begin with. Now, I thought it might have been a bit crass to talk about money, but it seems like you all really want to hear about it, so that's fantastic. I'll get into it. Compared to an equitable new build, by retaining the existing structure, we have a 26% cost saving on construction for adaptive reuse. Then, again, because we're retaining the existing structure, we can get a reduced construction period of about 9 months. This reduces the financing costs for the client by 30%. Then what we get back out of this investment is that we get a rental uplift by taking the project from a C-grade asset to an A-grade asset. We get 130% uplift per square metre on each tenancy, and then the rental vacancy reduces by 50%. So just to really kind of ram this point home for you, we have a project that is cheaper to build, that is cheaper to finance, which has a higher return on investment and de-risks the project for the client. So actually, once we did this, everyone else is right, it was a pretty easy conversation. And so then we could actually talk about the design elements and how we approach the building. So coming in from 60 Albert, you can see we've really softened that interface and given the space back to the public. We step up into the building to the cafe tenancy, which works in support of both the public and the 5 stories of work club that we've got on the lower levels of the building. And we do have some really playful spaces that result from the existing building. We had car parks above, we had double height spaces in other areas, and so we do get a really interesting mix of spaces that come from reusing a building. Is this the result you would have if you built it from scratch? Absolutely not. But it is the result of what can happen when you're kind of pushed to be a bit more creative with more limitations. And then, as I touched on before, we're wrapping the building in over 1,500 square metres of landscaping, and that's on a site that's only about 1,600 square metres in size to begin with. Up into the office plates, where previously we had a continuous servicing system that ran throughout the entire building, and so you'd have shared, dirty, recycled air, the worst kind of recycled air, pushed throughout the building, pushing COVID around to all of the floors. Now we have a floor-by-floor air conditioning system and servicing system. So it means every tenancy has the ability to control their own usage, control their own environment, and mitigate their own energy usage. Every floor plate has access to these internal courtyards. The internal courtyards are kind of like the lung of the building. What they do is they allow every building they're on an operable facade system, and they let every tenancy to have 100% fresh air at their discretion, and then at night they open up and allow for night purging. And of course they're a great social space in addition to that, so everything has to perform in 2 ways, I think, when we're moving forward. And then when we come to the top of the building, we have our PV gardens. Now, I say PV gardens very purposefully because it's not just a series of PV panels sat on top of a concrete slab. They have to sit in a landscape, and that's a 3-fold reason. The habitat is obviously good for us, it's good for birds, it's good for pollinators. That habitat, of course, cools the environment, mitigating our heat island problems, but also helps to mitigate the temperature, heat loss, and heat gain to the building. And then the reduced temperature air around the PV panels, helps them run more efficiently. So that means we have a solution which is aesthetic, that it is healthy, and it is efficient, which is the ultimate goal. Sorry, there's some data. Now, I think in all fairness, I've thrown a lot of numbers at you today. So if there's 3 things that you walk away from this talk with, I'd like it to be these numbers. By retaining 85% of the existing structure, we hold 6,400 tonnes of carbon in the existing building. By retaining that same structure, we get a 29%, it's actually, I beg your pardon, I'll edit myself, that should be a 26% cost saving in construction. And then through the retention of the basement alone, we get a 9-month time saving in construction. So that's 9 months less of financing fees. That's 9 months less of early works and site works. That's 9 months less of site overheads. 9 months left of noisy, dusty, polluted construction annoying the community. 9 months less of traffic impositions, resulting in 9 months less of headaches for council and a smoother town planning process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathleen and Reade. Really appreciate that. Wow, you know, how can you argue against a case like that? It's like, oh my goodness, you know, efficient from a financial point of view, but that whole sort of bringing that whole new life into a building. So I can imagine this could well be the norm in the future.
We certainly think so.
I mean, maybe just a quick question before we wrap up for lunch, because we're out of time. There's something that's come up here around, you know, what are some of the more innovative requests that clients have been asking you guys from a sustainability point of view? I know there are quite a few questions coming in, so we may just have to go with the one of the top two maybe. So if you wanted to maybe incorporate perhaps also the second one in there around maybe carbon and environmental outcomes in design. So,
well, I would actually say that we're in a lot of ways leading that conversation. We do have clients coming into us saying, you know, our client for this one, they said, we want to have a carbon zero project, we want an environmentally positive project, but we also want to knock it down and rebuild it. So, so then we had to have that conversation of, actually, if your goals are good, but this is how you would achieve it. So I would say that most of our clients are actually coming to us knowing that they want to do right and knowing that they want to do the right thing, but not necessarily having the ideas and really wanting to hear them and hear them come in a really succinct manner, which I think is the kind of the first value add we had on the project.
I think more than clients do for us. So for us in the sort of predominantly in the private development space, the shift is being led in the market by the investment community. So we talked a little about millennials and their value proposition, which is about environmental leadership and clear social reform, which we've seen happen, you know, quite openly in the last 5 years, quite a lot. That pairs so closely to the ESG values that come out of large investment groups in North America, out of super firms, out of Scandinavia. So those ESG positions that, like if we're frank, we are so far behind in Australia in the built environment that space is being led by other places in the world, but they have large investment portals that are now coming to Australia and effectively replacing the investment that was here 10 years ago through mainland China and Southeast Asia. It is now North America and North Europe investing here, and their expectations around environmental credentials and social ambitions is much higher than what we've seen in the last 10 years, which is really refreshing. So sort of we get together with them and gang up on the clients a little bit and force them to go down this path. But I think what we're excited about that is that we've always sat in the seat of openly talking about our practice, meeting the design requirements of the project and sitting in the seat of trying to resolve the commercial position for them. And excitingly for us, we've battled, you know, in the sort of merit-based discussion around environmental leadership in projects and the sort of social identity of them. We're seeing that now not be an issue. That hurdle is dissolved because of now the focus of the ESG investment groups. So it's really refreshing. So I think this platform is, at least for us, it's happening in every project. But yeah, the adaptive reuse piece I think is going to happen a lot in Melbourne over the next 15 years.
Nice to hear that. There's one question that's come up that's quite specific. So I don't know if you guys want to pick that one up. That are there issues of shading with solar garden? And
oh yeah, so the boys who I got to render that probably didn't raise those PV panels quite enough. But in an ideal situation, you actually had them on little stilts, and then they are shade tolerant, shade preferable plants that go in the understory to help cool that environment. So yeah, no, it's a good question, but there's a really simple solution for it. So. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. Looks like we've just run out of time. Really appreciate it. And please join with me in thanking Reade and Kathleen.
Thank you.
Well, we'll now break for lunch, and we'll see you back here at 1:55. And again, I'm going to use the break myself to really go in and meet as many suppliers and people in the trade hall. It's exciting. I'd urge you to do the same. Go in and visit their booths. Have a chat to them about their products and different kinds of projects that they've been working on. And we'll look forward to seeing you back here at 1:55. Thank you, and have a great lunch. Thank you.